Welcome back to the Minecraft Book Club, the series where I play Minecraft while talking about books. And today, we're going to be talking about Grapes of Wrath. And we're going to be doing that all the while we complete a project that I've been pushing off for nearly a year. I think actually it's a year now. We've got this iron golem farm. It's been working pretty well. I've got nearly a double chest worth of iron in the storage barn over there. But goodness gracious, is this thing an eyesore. Let's just go to the top of our terraced farms up here real quick and take a gander. Because, yeah, you know, pretty town, yuck. But don't worry, my friends, today we are going to fix that. All the while, of course, we talk about Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. Amazing book, phenomenal book. Love the Grapes of Wrath. And hopefully by the end of this episode, this thing is going to be filled in with a nice steel mill, you know, because it's an iron farm. However, for this build, we're going to need a ton of bricks. So that's going to bring us over to this little cave. A little itty bitty cave. It's actually like really big in here. But we're going to be mining up like all of this clay. It's like, ow. Like, I think the bottom down here is all clay. That's a lot of creepers. Get me out of there. But yeah, we're going to need like 4 shulker boxes of clay, I'm pretty sure. At least the clay balls. And then I have to smelt them all. Oh, dang it. Okay. So while we light up that cave and harvest some clay, let's go ahead and summarize the book. So our story begins with our main character, our protagonist, if you're so Englishly inclined, Tom Joad. Tom Joad is some guy in Oklahoma, and he just got out of prison. He was there for 2 years because he killed a man. So he hitchhikes back home to the Joad farm, and he finds that nobody is there. And what ends up happening is he walks around and he finds this guy called Casey, who used to be his, like, preacher. And Casey's like, oh, I remember you. I baptized you down in the river. I'm no longer a preacher, though. I'm not a preacher. So they actually stumble across one of their neighbors who kind of explains what's been going on in the area. But the Dust Bowl is happening, which is a event in American history, where there's just a ton of dust, and it kills all the crops, and like grasshoppers are like killing all the crops, eating all the crops, and no one can really grow anything. The soil has been used for farming cotton for a long period of time, and cotton ruins the soil, like all the nutrients in the soil, and all these farmers aren't able to make ends meet, and they have to leave the land. This is because they are all sharecroppers, which is a system where you kind of just live on someone else's land, or like the bank's land. I'm not really sure. But you live on the land, and you farm the land, and you pay like rent for your farm. So a lot of these farmers aren't able to pay their rent, basically, and they're getting kicked off of the land. However, our main character, Tom Joad, is able to find his family over on his uncle's farm, and he finds everyone there, and they're all surprised because they thought he was in jail. But they actually got kicked off of their land, and they're all packing up, ready to go to a magical place known as California. They've been getting advertisements and flyers saying that there's a lot of work in California, and they need workers to come and pick fruit. So all these Oklahomans are, you know, getting kicked off of their farms, and they're like, well, shoot, there's work over in California, so we might as well go over there because we got to feed the family, make some money. And that is exactly what the Joad family decides to do. They pack up all their stuff, pack up what they can, and they sell a lot of their stuff. So they pack everything into a big old pickup truck, and then they head out, you know? It's time to leave Oklahoma, and they hit the road. You know, I think they're on Route 66. I think that's like the big route they're taking, I'm pretty sure. But they start taking that all the way to California, and they're all talking like, wow, I can't wait to get there and just snack on peaches and, you know, just eat grapes all day. It's going to be like a wonderful time. We're just going to sit there and eat fruit. And if I haven't mentioned this, or if you don't know history too well, because I did mention the Dust Bowl, this is set in like the 1930s, which is the midst of the Great Depression, the United States. Big poverty time, big sad. But yeah, the Joad family goes on their way. They get kind of scammed out of selling a lot of their animals because everyone's selling their animals. No one's buying because everyone's getting kicked off the land. So yeah, the Joad family is making their way over to California, and along the way, the truck breaks down, something called a conrod. If you're a truck person, you might know that, or a car person. I'm not. They camp out next to this other truck, and they become friends with this other truck. But Tom Joad goes and tries and gets a new conrod from a junkyard, and there's a weird guy with only one eye. Very unimportant to the story, very unimportant detail, this guy with one eye, but I have remembered it as I talk about this book. So you are cursed with the knowledge that there's a man with one eye in Grapes of Wrath. Congratulations. But they get the part, and it's an easy, like, one-night fix. And this truck that they're, like, camping next to, as they're camping next to them, their grandpa dies, or, like, the Joad grandpa dies. He didn't want to leave in the first place. He's like, I'm gonna die on this land. And then he dies right as you take him off the land. That's probably symbolic of something. People's attachment to the land. But yeah, Grandpa Joad is dead. And this couple that they park next to help bury him and give him funeral rites. But the Joads are like, you guys are part of the family now. You need to travel with us. We'll help you about. They're like, oh, thank you so much. Thanks for helping us. We'll join on the road with you. So now they've got a traveling partner. The family that I don't remember their name because they're not really important. But yeah, these guys continue to make their way through Route 66, heading to California. And there's a couple things to note here, I guess. The most notable is that there's a campground where the guy's charging like 50 cents a night to stay there. And everyone's like, well, shoot, we'll just go park alongside the highway. We're not paying 50 cents to just like sleep on your land. And the guy's like, well, you don't know about vagrancy laws. And they're like, no, we don't know about vagrancy laws. So apparently, whatever state they're in has vagrancy laws, which is if you're homeless, you can get arrested, basically. If you're homeless and jobless, you can get arrested. So the Joads, already strapped a little bit for cash, are kind of forced to stay on this guy's land for 50 cents a pop because, well, they don't want to get arrested for vagrancy law. Oh, and then in the same campground, there's a guy, and he's like, you guys are headed to California? They're like, yeah, we're heading to California with the whole family. And he's like, oh, you shouldn't do that. And they're like, why? And he's like, oh, I've said too much. I don't want to upset you. And they're like, no, tell us. And he's like, well, it's not all sunshine and glory like you imagine it is. And the Joes are like, what do you mean? We keep getting flyers for all this work. And he's like, yeah, I know. I'm coming back from California because it was garbage and sucked. And basically what this guy says, in order to creep these families out, is that these farmers send out flyers for workers saying that they need 100, but they send out the flyer to like 100,000 people. So they get 100,000 people to show up at their farm, and they're like, well, shoot, now I have 100,000 people. And they're all starving because it's a horrible time in the Great Depression. And that means they're desperate for work, so I can just pay them like pennies and they'll have to work for pennies. And the Joads are like, that's not true. We'll just figure it out when we get there. And the guy's like, all right, I warned you. And then it starts a whole fight because they're like, you didn't warn us anything. You're just freaking us out. But the next day, the Joads continue down on to California still, and they end up getting to this town called Needles, which I think is like right on the border of California and Arizona. And while they're there, one of the brothers, Noah, he decides to just leave. He was like dropped on his head as a kid and is a little silly, and he just starts like swimming down the river because he thinks like this is where he needs to be. Oh, but yeah, so the route to California after Needles is all deserts. They're like, okay, we need to drive at night so we don't bake in the heat, because they're like a family of like 12 moving around, I think, and a lot of them have to sit in the truck bed in the sun, and it's really hot, and they get sunburnt. They're like, we don't want this to happen, so let's just go at night, because it's a desert. Now, unfortunately, Grandma Joad is now sick. Something else happens where the couple they're traveling with is like, go on without us, we'll make it over there, I need to wait for us to recover, or something like that. So the Joads move on without the couple, and then Grandma Joad is sick, and they get to the California border guard, and the Californians are like, you guys got any plants on you that you shouldn't be bringing into the state? We need to check the entire truck. And then Mama Joad, she's like, no, we've got a sick person in here, we gotta keep going. And Grandma's been sick for like a week, I think. So the border guards take a look at Grandma, and they're like, oh my gosh, yeah, you guys need to get to hospital like ASAP. So they let the Joads go, the whole family gets to keep going on their trail, and then they finally get into whatever region of California they drove to, and they start unpacking, and they realize that Grandma Joad is dead, And Mama Jode knew she was just hiding it because she's like, the family has to get across to California. I couldn't just let us not get across to California. So yeah, Grandma Jode is now dead. But now that they're in California, you know, they got to start finding work. And they end up camping in something called a Hooverville, which is basically just like a homeless camp. It's called a Hooverville because Herbert Hoover was the president at the start of the Depression. So that's kind of just the nickname for like all the poor camps is like, Herbert Hoover caused this. But they stay in the Hooverville and it's kind of filled with crazy people, honestly. That night in the Hooverville, a crazy event happens where a farmer comes in and he's like, hey, I need people to come pick fruit on my property. And then one guy that the Jodes are a bit familiar with because they're helping this guy fix his truck. That guy is like, well, what are you paying? And the guy's like, oh, you know, I don't know how much we're paying. It depends on how much people there are. And the guy's like, don't fall for this sucker's words. He's going to pay you nothing, and you guys are all going to starve. You're better off not working for this guy. And then the police come up behind this dude, and they're like, hey, stop that, you Red. Now, a Red is basically just some guy that asks for higher wages. They call them Reds. But they call this guy a Red, and the police start shooting at him, because they're like, you need to be arrested, Red. So then Tom Joad's like, I'm having none of that. So he trips the police officer that's like chasing after this guy. And then Tom Joad's like, shoot, I gotta go hide somewhere. So he goes and hides. Casey, the preacher, he's like, I'm gonna take the blame for this. You guys have been so nice bringing me to California. I can help you guys out a bit. So he takes the blame for tripping this police officer and basically beating him up. And he leaves in a police car. So once the police are gone, the Jodes are like, okay, we got to get out of here. Someone said that down south there's a government camp, so let's go down there. So they start heading south, and as they do, they realize that the camp they were just in is now burning to the ground because a bunch of rioters are like, we don't want these Okies here in California. Get out of here. That's like a new slur that they're introduced to as Okies. So they head on south to a government camp. And once they get there, they find out it's like a really nice place. Basically, these people are running the camp and they know their rights. Any police officer that comes in to try to burn the camp, they're like, you need a warrant. And then it makes the police officers upset. So they have like no access to the camp. It's kind of run by Okies for Okies. And well, they get into this government camp and they get a little place to stay. Tom Joad is able to find work, but it's only for 5 days. But this camp is pretty cool. You know, they hold weekly dances and stuff. It's a nice, like, relaxing environment. One of the characters I have yet to mention so far is Rose of Sharon, or Rosa Sharn. Rosa Sharn is Tom Joad's sister, and she's been pregnant. Her boyfriend actually just ran away, or her fiance. When they got to California, he just kind of, like, ran away. He's like, this is poverty, I'm getting out of here, and he runs away. So Rosa Sharn is, like, 8 months pregnant, and she's with a kid in her belly. So she doesn't really work too much at this government camp. Instead, she kind of just hangs around. And there's I think it's a Quaker. It might be something else. But this lady that she's hanging around with is like, those weekly dances are just full of sin. You don't want to go there. It's just sinners. And I've seen pregnant ladies go and dance and then they have miscarriages. And, you know, the whole camp's full of sin. And the manager of the camp is actually Satan himself. So this kind of freaks out Rosa Sharn, but it's, you know, it's kind of whatever. Life continues on. One of the weekly dances, Tom Joad and his buddies figure out that the police are going to try and infiltrate an attack so that they have probable cause to come into the camp and kind of just like shut it down. So there's a dance where everyone's having fun, and then they're able to find some Okies that have been planted by the police in order to, you know, start a fight. And they kind of escort them out of the facility. Now, as nice as that government camp is, unfortunately, the Jodes are unable to find work. So they have to leave the camp and go up north. And as they're going north, they meet a peach farm guy. And he's like, hey, I need peaches to be picked. Come by and we'll get you housed and set up. So the Jodes go over. And they have like a police escort into the farm, and they're given a little like hut to stay in. And they get 5 cents for every box of peaches like collected, and they all have to be like in perfect condition. They make like $1 worth of, peach boxes. However, unfortunately, the grocery store is far away, and they're all forced to use the grocery store that the company stocks up, and they have kind of spiked up prices. But they are able to get food, which is something they haven't had in a while. But then later that night, Tom Joad goes a-travelin' outside of the camp to try and figure out why they needed a police escort to go into the camp. And what he finds is Casey, the preacher, leading a workers' strike against this peach farmer dude. And Casey starts talking about this whole, like, oh, if you organize your people and fight back, you can't get screwed over. We got screwed over because it was 5 cents per box, but then they changed it to 2.5 on us. So then, we're out here striking, trying to protest these prices. And that's when they brought you guys in. You guys are at 5 cents right now, but as soon as they break up this strike, you guys are definitely going to drop down to 2.5 cents a box. However, unfortunately, the police stumble upon this little camp that Casey has, and they're like, hey, here's the leader, here's that Casey guy, and they hit him in the head with a pickaxe and flatten his skull. So Casey, the preacher, is now dead. And then this, upsets Tom Joad, so he takes the pickaxe and bashes in the skull of a police officer. I'm not sure if he kills the guy, but, it's not the greatest thing to happen. So Casey gets beat up by some of the officers, and he has a giant gash on his skull, or his face. When he gets back to the family, he has to, go into hiding, because the police are going to start checking, all of the cabins, trying to find out who beat up this police officer. And so the family kind of freaks out, and after the second day of being on this peach farm, they head out, and they go a little more north to where a cotton farm is. So they're there to pick cotton. And it's nice, good work here in the cotton picking world. Unfortunately, Tom Joad's little brother Ruthie, or little sister Ruthie, I'm not really sure, but this Ruthie kid gets beat up by some kid, and they take Ruthie's Cracker Jack, and Ruthie's like, my big brother's gonna beat up your big brother, blah blah blah, you know how kids are. But it escalates into Ruthie saying yeah, my brother just killed a police officer. So then the mom freaks out, and she's like, Ruthie, you're not supposed to be telling people our family's darkest secrets. And so she goes and finds Tom Joad, who's hiding out in a creek, and she gives him $7, and he's like, don't worry, Mom, I'm gonna run away, I'm gonna fight like Casey did. We can't be living in conditions like this, the workers have rights. So Tom Joad leaves, and that's the last we see of him in the book. And then in the next few days, there's a giant flood. Lots of rain here in California, and the little train car that they're staying in is about to get flooded. So the Joad dad, he goes out and starts digging trenches and gets everyone to help so the rain doesn't flood their little campsite. And as this is going on, Rosa Sharn from earlier, she's giving birth. The dad, his trench fails, and the campsite gets flooded, and he goes back. And Rosa Sharn's baby is a crumpled up blue child. So she miscarried because she didn't have enough nutrients. So their Uncle John, he goes and puts the baby in a little box and floats it down the river, and he's like, maybe this will help convince those Californians that life ain't good for us right now. Anyway, the rain keeps pouring down, so they all move up to higher ground, and they're able to find a little, a barn with a bunch of hay, and it's nice and dry inside, and they go in, and what they find is a little boy who's panicked because his dad is starving, and the kid's like, please, anything would help. He kept giving me his food because he didn't want me to starve, and I tried feeding him some potatoes I found, and he just kind of threw them up, so his stomach needs something soft like milk. Mama Joad just looks at Rosa Sharn, and they both smile to each other, and they kick everyone out of the barn. And Rosa Sharn, who's freezing cold and wet, and had just given birth to a stillborn child after her husband ran away, she goes and breastfeeds this old, 50-year-old guy. And then the book ends with her smiling mysteriously. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is Grapes of Wrath. Right now I'm trying to find granite, but I'm running out of inventory space. I need 10 stacks of granite. and I don't have 10 stacks of granite, so we have to go mine, and my last granite spot is all out of granite. It's a rough life out here on the book club series. I mean, not as rough as being an Okie in Great Depression era California. So while we continue to find granite, I'm going to share some thoughts. Ooh, beautiful. Here it is. I'm just going to share some thoughts I have on the book. The first thing is something I failed to mention in the summary, and that is these little like poetic interlude chapters. So throughout the book, you're following Tom Joad for the most part, but then Steinbeck, who is the author, John Steinbeck, every now and then he'll sneak in a little like super poetic, like large scale type of chapter. Most of his chapters are like 40 pages long. It's a miserable experience. But then these like short little, 6 to 10 page chapters pop up, and they kind of give a bigger picture on like what's going on in society at the moment. And honestly, if the book was just those poetic chapters, I think it would be like my favorite book of all time. Grapes of Wrath is definitely in my top 5, but it is a bit of a drag, and these poetic chapters really help to break it up a bit, but they're all like super fun. You get little snippets of life from other areas of, just where the Tom Joad family goes. There's one like really cute chapter about a diner on the highway that's, dealing with these truck drivers, and they love the truck drivers because they're stable business, but these migrant people come in and all they do is just beg. But the truck drivers like these slices of pie that the diner has. I don't know, it was just like a fun little chapter, and whenever I think of Grapes of Wrath, that's probably like the highlight of the book for me, is just this like chapter slice of life about a diner serving pie to truck drivers. But on the same note as these interlude chapters, I do want to talk about one specifically, and that is chapter 25. And that's because this chapter kind of gives me an explanation of why this book is called The Grapes of Wrath. And I just kind of wanted to do a little deep dive into that. And lucky enough, I think we got our 10 stacks of granite, so we are done with this section. So chapter 25 is a kind of historical snippet into a few months that occurred in, I think, 1933. And basically what's happening in 1933 is that there are these big canning companies, and what they do is they're the only ones that a bunch of farmers can sell product to, because it's the Great Depression. No one's gonna buy your like really nice grapes or peaches, so these canneries are buying a lot of the peaches and stuff from these farmers, but since no one else is buying it, they just buy the peaches like super cheap, and then they can it into things that just don't ever spoil, they never go bad, and they just kind of like keep a hold of it and sell it at like really high prices in comparison to what they bought. And so a lot of these farmers are going out of business. It's a rough time. So these canning companies are putting a lot of farmers out of business, and the banks will like buy the land, and then the canneries start buying the farms from the bank. So they're kind of getting a whole little monopoly on the farms and agriculture in the United States. And out here in California, the environment is not terrible. So a lot of these farms continue to function as they would normally, growing a lot of food. But because everyone sort of needs food and no one has money, they have to burn like a lot of their produce to keep up the price. And there's this like really poetic description of the canneries buying up all these oranges and tossing the oranges into a river, and these oranges are covered in kerosene, which is like a flammable gasoline sort of deal. That way, like, nobody can eat the oranges and they can still make a profit on the oranges they sell. Because, if they just allowed the normal Okies to eat the oranges, then there'd be zero customers at all. And there's a little complaint about a town in Ohio that kills 3 million pigs to keep up the price of pork, and they bury the pigs in quicklime, which is like a concrete, I think. So, they're just wasting all this food while people are starving because they need to keep up the price of these goods. And I'm just going to read the last sentence or so of the chapter. And that is, and they stand still and watch the potatoes float by, listening to the screaming pigs being killed in a ditch and covered with quicklime. Watch the mountains of oranges slop down to a putrefying ooze. And in the eyes of the people there is the failure. And in the eyes of the hungry there is a growing wrath. In the souls of the people the grapes of wrath are filling and growing heavy for the vintage. So we're going to kind of break down that phrase, the grapes of wrath. The use of it that I'm familiar with comes from the Book of Revelations, and in the book there, it talks about how anyone who worships like the devil or the mark of the devil or whatever, they will be drinking the wine of God's fury. And for those curious, that is Revelations 14:9 through 10. But from what I can tell, that's like the origin of this phrase is God's wrathful wine. And then we can fast forward a bit into the Civil War, American Civil War, where there is a song called The Battle Hymn of the Republic, in which there's a line, mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. So this is like a Union song against the Confederacy, right? And what they're basically saying there is that the Union, they're trampling out the grapes of wrath, which means, just like stomping on grapes like you would to make wine. So they're making God's wrathful wine and they're going to feed it to the South. So with that in mind, right, that becomes the grapes of wrath. That's how God makes the wrathful vintage wine. So then when we're in the context of the grapes of wrath, in that chapter it was said that the people are looking upon all these all the starvation on all these big companies like forcing starvation pretty much instead of helping out the community, and they're saying, hey, we're angry, we're upset, and their eyes are filled with the grapes of wrath. So to me, this book is about like the seeds of a revolution, but not exactly a revolution. The people, they are starving and they're starting to get angry. So they have the grapes of wrath, but they have not yet turned it into the wrathful wine, right? It's just the seeds of what could come. I hope that makes sense. That's my interpretation of what the title, The Grapes of Wrath, means. So yeah, that's sort of my interpretation there, is that the grapes of wrath are kind of the seeds of revolution, the seeds of a civil war to come. I imagine the Great Depression was probably the closest the U.S. has ever come to a second civil war, just because of the mass starvation. We're going to talk about that real quick, because starvation, my friends, leads to civil war. My mistake, I meant revolution. Revolution, not civil war. And this book kind of shows why that's the case, but it's a very well-known thing that as long as the populace is fed, the government's basically going to be stable. Everyone, at least here in the United States, always talks about oh, we're so polarized here in the US, we're more polarized than we were during the Civil War. And yeah, that's true. But guess what? Polarization does not lead to civil war. You can look through history and there's been polarization before, but the only time it leads to revolution is when the polarization leads to starvation. People only are willing to fight in civil wars or revolutions when their lives are at stake, and that means that doing nothing is the worst alternative. Your life would be better off if you fight. And that's kind of what we see in the Grapes of Wrath, is that all of these people, the alternative to them starving is fighting. And, that seems, it doesn't fruit into anything good in the book, but if it did, that could be a problem. But that is a great thing highlighted here in Grapes of Wrath, because, if you were living like that, war would not be that much worse. I'm not going to bore you guys with all of my interpretations and ideas of this book. Maybe we can do that if you guys really like this video, but, it's already getting pretty long and we haven't even built yet. So I'm just going to briefly go over my last few points here. So yeah, last few things I want to talk about is that this book kind of highlights the class divisions in the United States. This has always been a thing. This isn't something new. The United States is a class-divided nation. But, it kind of just highlights that point. All these poor people are willing to, help each other, and it's kind of like a poor versus rich person thing. I don't know if that makes much sense, but I want to speed through these because we're getting late into the video. It's another thing, too, migrants versus locals. Do the Okies even have the rights to, come into California and take a bunch of jobs? I don't know. That's something for you guys to talk about if you want. This book also highlights how powerful community can be, right? Community is important. You see this as all the poor people kind of bond together. The book also highlights the dangers of unchecked power. These big farming conglomerates that aren't even the true honest small farmer. they're all, very almighty and powerful, and there's no checks and balances. So, it kind of highlights the importance of checks and balances. But yeah, overall, this book is phenomenal. It's very powerful writing. I love the book. It is a very difficult read, so I wouldn't recommend just like jumping into this if you haven't read a book before. I find it very difficult. It took me like a month to read this, which, for a professional book reader like me, I'm not a professional book reader, that's saying something. But yeah, Grapes of Wrath, phenomenal book, 10 out of 10. I'm gonna continue farming up all these materials we're gonna need for the build, and then hopefully we just cut to a little like cinematic, pretty shot of me building this beautiful steel mill. Enjoy! Ladies and gentlemen, there she is. A project a year in the making, but finally done. The wonderful, the greatest, the most beautifulest steel mill that I have ever created. In fact, it's the only one that I've ever created. But yeah, here it is. The steel mill finally exists in our world. I will say it is a pretty massive thing. I actually had to go and mine for 16 stacks of cobbled deep slate. I didn't have that, but it turned out well. We got it done. I think one of my better views of it is from this side of town. Just like walking in here now just looks really cool. We've got some minor window texturing, but a lot of like stains on the brick building. You can see there with like the cobble, like the mossy cobble and the cobble deep slate. Very happy with this build. Is probably the best build I've done, if not the Riverside Market from Autocraft's episode last week. Both of these are kind of like new age King of Candles right here. We've got these cool arches on the side that I'm very proud of. I don't know, it makes it look kind of gothic. But I figured a build like this is actually like perfect for Grapes of Wrath because, it's like a symbol of like a big, I don't know, big like industrial thing. But I'm very happy with how this came out, honestly. Super happy with it. I hope you guys feel the same. Good thing I did not die there. And of course, like old King of Candles would do, there is no interior. These guys were falling down. Oh, I almost hit that guy. But these guys were just falling down because I had to like change up the iron golem farm a bit. But it should be fixed now. Everything should be nice and dandy. We've got a lot of iron already. We'll be doing the interior of this first thing next episode, but I've got some cool things planned for it. But the best part of the steel mill is that it kind of rounds out our town finally. We've got like a pretty solid silhouette and skyline, and we're not even done with like the most important part yet, because we're going to have a bridge going right there to hold... Okay, these are annoying. We're going to have a bridge going down like there, I think, and that's going to hold like a train. And that'll really round out the silhouette for sure. But that is for a future episode. One last thing before I leave you all. We've got a map, and it's time to get rid of this stain right here, the Iron Golem farm. Are you guys ready for the map to update? Because it's going to update as soon as I left click this. That was the wrong map. Okay, never mind. This one. Look for that corner. Oh. Boom. There it is. Oh my gosh. Guys, that is a significant change on the map. Like, it actually looks like a really full town now. I'm genuinely, like, super happy with that. But yeah, right here is where we're going to put that archway bridge thing holding the train. We've got some buildings there to do. We've got the town hall to do. And then I want to do some terraforming out here and knock out a bunch of the trees. But once we get those things done, the city is going to be complete. Fort Oxbow is going to be done in like 4 or 5 episodes, guys. Can you believe it? I can't. I've been working on this for like a year, and we're so close to being done. And then we get to move on to the next big project. But I am very happy with how this town is turning out. If you'd like to see the interior, check out next episode, in which we'll be talking about the book Centennial by James A. McKenna. I'll try to read that book a little faster. It's been like a month, maybe 2 months since the last book club episode. We're not doing that again. I will be uploading more frequently, I hope. That's, fingers crossed. I always say that, but that's the promise. Not the promise, that's the hope. Beautiful, beautiful thing. If you'd like to watch my video on Centennial by James A. McKenna, or anything else in the town, or, just other books in the future, be sure to subscribe, and those will, pop up in your feed or suggested and whatnot. But we're close to being done. Next episode is this jail, the sheriff, and the bank. We're going to make those for Centennial by McKenna. Anyways, guys, it is late for me. I hope you all are having a wonderful day or evening or whatever time of day it is for you. So yeah, thank you all for watching this episode of Book Club, and we will see you all in the next one. I hope you all have a wonderful day.